I'd like to spend a little more time introducing a few more basic concepts in the early stages of this class, and once again, a brief lecture on principles for practice that I call a framework for practice in the social work field. Minority populations have experienced oppression throughout their lives and throughout their existence. In large part, this is created by the institutions of our society, such things as religion, education, law, the media, and even the family for that matter. Throughout history, the social work profession has served as champions for the dispossessed and the oppressed and worked to advocate on their behalf. Services that we provide need to be culturally competent and culturally sensitive. Culturally competent may be an impossible standard, but certainly culturally sensitive, being a cultural learner, is the minimum standard we need. The NASW Code admonishes us not to practice, condone, facilitate, or collaborate with any form of discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, age, marital status, political belief, religion, or mental or physical disability. Oppression in the society that we live exists in such forms as racism and ethnocentrism, sexism, classism, ableism, heterosexism, ageism, xenophobia, religious bigotry. These isms are the social arrangements in our clients' lives that make living very toxic for many of them and are going to be the focus of much of our study throughout this semester. Social workers intervene with individuals at the point of interface between the individual and his or her environment. While our work focuses us upon helping persons to understand and cope with their environment, good practice and also our professional ethics require that we advocate for social change to aid in improving opportunities for our clients and to improve the quality of their lives. We combine the ecological model with the diversity framework in this class using the strengths and empowerment perspectives, and hopefully this is the approach you would take in your practice. We need to be careful in our work and ask ourselves whether our work helps our clients by leading the client towards adjusting and coping with the realities and demands of society. On the surface, this may seem to be the appropriate thing to do, but in the long run, is it helpful for the client to learn to adjust to a society that is oppressive and that denies them equal access to many of the benefits of society? Should our practice help by advocating for the client's cause and pushing society to meet the needs of the client? This is an old dilemma in our profession. Do we utilize social control, which is really the social treatment method that many of us use in our practice, or should we utilize social change as a framework for our intervention? It is possible to do both. But again, many of us focus in our desire to work with individuals and families in the field upon social adjustment, social control, and don't really get involved in advocating on behalf of clients to improve their lot as a group. The ecological framework for practice uses 5 domains or levels that are interconnected. And we'll look at an illustration of this in a moment, but they are the historical, that is the passage of time and how that impacts the client and the client's ancestors and the client's children, the environmental and structural, the cultural, the family system, and the individual himself or herself. The conditions of the client can be assessed in relation to each of these levels. This tends to take an evolutionary view of human beings that considers adaptations as being very necessary. This is an illustration of Uri Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, and it demonstrates the 5 levels, and actually this splits it into 6 levels so that you see the individual is at the center and then going out in concentric circles from the center of the microsystem, the mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and the chronosystem. If you look back at the list that we looked at earlier, actually I think the environmental, structural, and the cultural could be turned around so that if the broadest is the top and the most narrow point of intervention is at the bottom. But in any event, you get the picture here. What we're doing is we're looking at how each of these systems impact the individual. So the family and school, peers have an immediate impact. Less immediate but still very important are mesosystems that are involved in the client's lives, such as the school system, the religious affiliation, workplace. the exosystem, which really has to do with politics and economics and education, the institutions in society, that is, the overarching beliefs and values, and this really has to do with the culture of the client or of ourselves. And then finally, chronosystem, the dimension of time, because all of these change and all of these look differently as time goes on. Information, matter, and energy exchange between individuals and their environment and the various levels of those environment in the course of their adaptations. Each element of the ecosystem tends to shape the other. So it's not a one-way kind of thing. It's a very complex and complicated kind of interaction among all these levels. We know this as ecological theory, or oftentimes in a social work training, you'll hear about the person in environment view of social work practice, that is the PIE. This is something you should become familiar with if you're not already. There are also processes that create stress and problems in living for individuals. Life transitions, for example, require that individuals restructure their life space. When you have a social work development course of human behavior and social environment, you're probably going to look at the life transitions and how they affect the individual. Stress is increased if change is sudden, unexpected. Changes happen all the time in life, but if it's sudden and unexpected, there's much more stress associated with it than if it's anticipated. But nonetheless, even an anticipated change creates stress in life. So for instance, graduation from a high school or college creates stress in an individual's life, and also in the lives of the parents and the others associated with that individual, as everybody has to adjust to the new reality. Gradual change tends to allow more time for adjustment, but sudden change can impact the long-term trajectory of one's life. Some crisis or some major event can change the whole course of one's life. We also must look at the environment that the client lives in and whether that environment is supportive or whether it interferes with those life transitions. So the environment of the client can be a source of stress, it can be a source of support, or it can be both. Families are often like this. There are many things about families that provide support to the individual, but there are other things sometimes that create conflict and stress in that individual's life. For a marginalized or oppressed person or a member of such groups, oftentimes they can find opportunity closed or limited by the institutions in their environment, so it's not supportive. This can even include institutions that are supposed to help the individual, such as the healthcare system, the mental health system, social services, schools and universities, religion, and so on. Each of these institutions, in their own way, at times, can contribute to the inequalities in our society. At times, primary groups can be unresponsive in dealings with life transitions, primary groups being family and peers in particular, and this creates even additional stress for the individual. Our intervention should focus on addressing any sense of powerlessness in the client's life, or what we would refer to as a lack of agency, that is, a sense that one can create change in one's life, through helping the client to see himself or herself as competent, worthwhile, and so on, and creating a cognitive shift for the client. You do this so that the client doesn't see himself or herself as being trapped in this subordinate role. You do this to counter stereotypes and myths that arise from their marginal status and to help them avoid internalizing those myths or acting out those stereotypes. This can happen and does happen very frequently. It helps to overcome self-perceptions of being powerless and victimized and work on that, help clients to identify where they do have an opportunity to effect change in their lives, and to learn new strategies to avoid contributing to their own victimization. This is referred to as stigma management. Still, it's very important that the worker keep practice focused on policy change and community change in addition to individual interventions. This can be done by addressing environmental pressures like discrimination, violence, and prejudice that become apparent in the course of working with an individual, perhaps advocating for that individual with institutions in the individual's life, and also helping the client to find ways to empower themselves to address those issues. Also, mobilizing political and social institutions to address the private troubles as public issues. When you work for agencies, for instance, and you see the agencies contributing to some of the difficulties in clients' life, to advocate for policy change, for instance, with that agency. Or as a social worker, even work full-time in policy areas so that you can create larger change in society for oppressed individuals. For most of us, our default perspective is that we see other groups through the lens of white, middle-class, heterosexual standards. I mean, this is the way most of us were raised, and we really have to consciously work to step out of that framework, take those lenses off if we're going to work with others and see them for who they are. Even if we ourselves are not white, middle class, or heterosexual, nonetheless, having lived in a society with such standards, it may have convinced us to see them as the proper norm. It's worth really examining these thoughts as you go about studying this issue during the course of the semester. Rather than adopting this default perspective, we should look at clients from each group in the context of their own culture. And one of the things we'll recognize is that oftentimes there is as much diversity within cultural groups as there may be between groups. So keep in mind that there are individuals within each of these groups, and those individuals don't always reflect the qualities and characteristics of their own particular group. So, you want to be careful to avoid stereotypes and prejudging individuals because of who they are and what groups they belong to. Traditional values in America focus on individualism, private ownership, property, minimal government. Sounds very libertarian, I think. These traditional values present a lot of difficulties for populations that are not in the majority, for those that are in the minority and that are oppressed. The value base that we as social workers should operate from when we work with diverse populations includes values like justice, independence, freedom, the importance of community life, client self-determination, and social change. These are all values that grow out of the social work code of ethics. Justice should be available to everyone and should be impartially applied. Our social conditions must be just, and if they're not, it is our responsibility as social workers to act on behalf of clients and client groups to correct those injustices. That's what I have to say about this. Again, a very short discussion, so if this engenders any thought that you want to bring up in class, please do so. Thank you.